John Ruggiero, and welcome to this episode of New Jersey Paranormal. Joining me today is Dr. John Muciaccia. John, thank you for being here. Fist bump.
Thank you for inviting me.
I do a lot of searching on the internet about paranormal related subjects and things that interest me. I was just Googling spirit communication and your name came up and your book, Spirit Lives. I read the synopsis and then I reached out to you and said, look, before we do this interview, I want to read the book. And I did read the book. And I found it very, very interesting. I made a lot of notes here, which is the first time I'm actually going to be referring to notes during an interview, because there were a lot of things that spoke to me. My interest in the paranormal is more science-based than it is religious-based. And your book, I think, opens up people's mind to the possibility of the afterlife, spirit communication. So I'm going to jump right in at the beginning. You mentioned at an early age you realized that your grandfather knew things, that he had this gift. Could you describe briefly what that gift was?
I could actually still see it. It happened when I was an adorable 10-year-old child. My mom and dad and the children, we were tenants on the top floor in the house I live in now. And the landlord decided she wanted to sell the house. So she gave mom and dad the first opportunity to buy the house. Now, my mother, before she made a decision, and my father, they didn't call a contractor in. They called my Sicilian grandfather, Giuseppe Galeotto. Oh. And I could picture him. I was 10 years old. I could picture him entering the house. My mom there, my father there. I was over here as this adorable 10-year-old. And he looked around. He just kind of felt the air. And he looked at my mother and he said in Italian, La casa è buona. And based on that, my mother and father bought the house.
Because of the energy. He said
well,
that he just felt.
He felt the energy. The energy was good in the house. La casa è buona.
And this was a common thing for him to be able to...
Well, I found out later, John, that people would... He lived in Bloomfield.
Right.
People would go to him for advice on business, on relationships, and he was always correct.
Oh, wow.
So you might say he was psychic.
Right. Intuitive.
Intuitive is a good word for Papa Galeotto, because we all called him Papa.
Okay. So let's get to the book.
Yeah.
Again, initially, I mentioned a lot how the first 5 or 6 pages, I'm not an avid reader, and you got to grab me right away. And the first 5 or 6 pages of your book accomplished that with me. I was all in at that point.
Thank you.
It starts by you describe in very touching detail the passing of your father in 1993. In particular, you write how important it was for you for his transition to be peaceful and dignified. You wrote that you could still feel his presence in the room while you were taking care of him.
Absolutely.
But then you mentioned that it wasn't until 15 years later that a spiritual counselor kind of mentioned to you that you can communicate with him. Before we get to that initial communication and how that happened, had you ever tried prior to the spiritual counselor mentioning it, have you ever tried to talk to him before that?
No.
Never once?
No.
And it never crossed your mind
that
it was possible?
But I did feel his presence.
Right.
And I always knew it was possible. I just think I needed the encouragement of the spiritual counselor who said, John, you can do it. Because your father is alive, but in a different dimension called spirit.
Okay. So that day, that initial conversation, he mentioned to you that you could do it. He explained how to do it.
Yes. Sit quietly, meditate, and meditation is much easier than we think. Light a white candle and just talk to him as though he's in the room with you. And I've done that for years, and I've never gotten the wrong answer to a question.
See, meditation is interesting to me as far as the paranormal and spirit communication, because I do it on different levels using equipments, recorders, things that measure temperature, static electricity. Meditation is interesting to me because a lot of mediums refer to that as a method that can open you up to communication. So he explained to you this method. What was the first interaction like, and how did you know that it was definitely, could you hear his voice? What happened that first time?
I had just a feeling of his presence.
Okay.
I didn't hear his voice, but I knew it was Dad's energy. And that's a good explanation. It was his energy that was answering me.
But you mentioned that you could go to him for advice. Even from
Yes.
that moment on, you would do that.
Absolutely correct,
often.
and I still do.
Was it an intuitive thing that you would say, Dad, I'm having trouble with my job or
Well,
something?
I have this situation,
Right,
and I need your
exactly.
advice.
And then what would the information from your father, how would it come across to you?
John, it was almost like I just knew what to do.
So the answers were sort of there.
Oh, they were instantaneous.
And you didn't know them before, he just...
I knew right from wrong. I knew left from right. And I would follow his guidance, his silent guidance, and I would be on the right path.
See, that again, that's so interesting to me because, again, mediums describe different methods in which spirits relay
Yes.
information to them. Your book, again, goes into detail about interviews and experiences that you've had. That was all the research as far as your journey in spirit communication and healing. Mediums you've interviewed, healers, regular people that you interviewed.
I call them ordinary people.
Ordinary people. You describe, again, 2.5 years it took you to write the book. But the book starts with the following statement, which this is what got me initially. The main purpose of Spirit Lives, your book, is to illustrate the fact that life goes on after the physical death. What were your beliefs prior to this journey?
Well, I guess they were religious, based on
Okay.
Christian religion, but
Okay.
I've actually felt that spiritual was a much more telling answer to the question, what happens when we physically die?
Right.
I think there's a dimension called spirit, and it is as lively or livelier than the physical world.
But prior to that, they were religious-based
Oh, yeah,
beliefs
yeah, yeah.
based
I was
on
a
your
boy
teachings
growing up.
and
Yes,
your
yes.
growing. Yeah. So, but the journey, would you say, shifted you away from, like you said, more of the you go to heaven, everybody goes to heaven, if you're good. The journey kind of, did it open up?
It changed. The
Yeah.
journey changed, and the place I found myself in had much more clear answers.
And this is all through the meditation and people you met and the experiences that
Just
you had.
believing. I
Okay.
mean, you have to have belief. You have to have faith in yourself and belief in what you're getting.
Okay. Another thing, again, that we talked about prior to this in our phone conversation, I'm not a religious person. I wasn't brought up Catholic. I didn't go to church a lot, weddings, funerals, that type of thing for me. It drove my mother crazy that I didn't, because all the rest of my siblings went to Catholic school. So
they?
I don't have those embedded religious beliefs of faith, let's call it. But your book isn't really about religion in any way.
No, it's not about religion at all.
Right.
It's the purpose I wrote the book is twofold: to give hope to people and
Right.
to give them knowledge.
Right. The spirit world,
Yes.
do you believe that is another dimension?
And I believe it is as close as your breath.
So what do you believe happens when the physical body goes? What happens
I
after that?
firmly believe 100% that we go to a different dimension called spirit that is full of life. And in that dimension called spirit, we will see our loved ones who've passed before us.
But are we, again, the physical body is gone. What are we after that? Are we energy-based beings? What do you believe?
Yes,
as far
I
as
think
your
we're
convers-
energy-based spirit who will reincarnate.
Right. Did your father tell you anything? And all, again, you say it's all kind of intuitive, but did he give you any information about what that transition is like? I mean, that's what I would be asking constantly, as far as me getting older, the curiosity. You know, death is something we fear because we
Yes,
don't know.
generally we
for
do
sure.
fear it, but it's not to be feared.
Right.
That's the
Was there
message I
anything
get.
in those conversations as far as
The feeling I
journey
got
is
was
like?
that the journey was smooth and the destination where he found himself was very warm and welcoming.
Okay. Again, a big part of the book are these interviews. Healers is another thing. I myself, we talked about this as well, I'm a skeptic at heart. It really is hard for me to believe that a person could heal another person, although we've interviewed people here that claim to do that. You've seen many healers.
I have, yes.
And you've witnessed many things as far as, again, different religions, different people, different age groups, beliefs. What is your opinion as far as healing?
Well, I can tell you this way, a little anecdote. A couple weeks after the book was published, I got a call from Colorado, from a gentleman named Rob Wergen, who is a very well-known healer. He worked out of Aspen. And he just works with the divine, which I would call the spirit world.
Right.
And he brings in their energy, which is a healing energy, to the person with whom he's working. And he worked with a lot of celebrities and stars, so to speak. So we became friends. He said, John, would you come out to Colorado and give a speech before my group? Within a week, I was at his place in Colorado, and I spoke to his group. So I think we're all healers, quite frankly.
You think it's possible for spirit to channel through us?
I believe it is, yes. All you have to do is have an open mind and just be willing to do it.
Right. How long after your father, was he the inspiration, first of all, for this book, for you to even to have the idea of, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to go on this journey? Was he the inspiration for the journey?
Well, I've always had an interest, but watching him pass gave me the motivation, yes. Because I know when he passed, I didn't go out to the hall and call the nurse for resuscitation. Dad was 94 years old.
Oh, wow.
He had lived a beautiful life, and he was only in hospital because he had fallen at home and broke his shoulder.
Oh, that's right.
So my feeling was I want to leave his body at peace. So I started to undress him. I took the hospital gown off him, and I covered him with pajamas.
You shaved him?
I shaved him because I had been shaving him every second day. And that was the second or third day, so he needed a shave. So I mean, people would say, well, you're crazy shaving the body of a man who's physically dead. No, that's something that I gave my father. Rather than have the hospital.
No, I think that was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I took my time. Then I went out maybe 45 minutes or an hour later to the nurse's station, and I said, I said, my father passed about an hour ago. But no need for resuscitation. He passed quietly. And I was allowed to push the gurney to the hospital morgue.
Really?
And it turned out, nothing's a coincidence. A boyhood friend of mine worked in the hospital, and he would visit my dad every day because they knew each other from my growing up. And he would say, John, did your father pass? Because we had the sheet over his head. And he helped me roll the gurney into the morgue, and he helped me put my father's body in the storage area.
You mentioned again about things happen for a reason, and sometimes fate does intervene, and we're led along a path. I believe that most of the time, but not all the time. You tell a story about you're in, was it Wyoming, or was it where you're going to write the book?
Oh, yes. Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
You're going there to write the book?
Yes. Well, to write a section of the book. I had started it, yes.
So you go into the hotel?
Why did I go there? I went there because I was away from phone calls. It's a skiing resort, and I don't ski. So I checked into the hotel where they filmed the movie Shane. Very famous movie in America.
So you have your bags, you go up to your room.
Go up, yes.
There's a problem with...
I went in, I put the lights on, the electricity wasn't working. So I called the front desk. I said, I just checked in about 2 minutes ago. I have no electricity in my room. They said, don't worry, Dr. Muciaccia, we'll send a maintenance man up. Within 2 or 3 minutes, I heard a knocking at the door. There was a Filipino gentleman who was knocking at my hotel room, and I opened the door. He said, you having a problem? I said, yes, I have no electricity. He put a big smile on his face. I said, what's your name? He said, my name is Akka. He said, you have electricity. Spirit uses electricity to connect me to people who are working on creative projects. Are you working on a creative project? I said, yes, I am. How do you know? He said, well, they told me. So he went to the wall, he flipped the switch on, and all the lights in the room. I mean, if I didn't see, if I had heard it, I wouldn't have believed it, but it happened to me. So I know it was real.
You know, it was funny. During our conversation yesterday, you said something that was really funny to me.
What was that?
Because in the paranormal field, we deal with a lot of people, and you've done a lot of interviews and spoken to a lot of people, and you said to me, I'm not a kook. and I thought that was so funny because a lot of people that you talk to in this field that I've interviewed they're out there.
With
I don't want
the
to
capital,
say kooky.
well,
They're
I'll say it.
You're not out there. You're genuine. You're telling about. You're talking about this book. To me, again, was a journey, and it was a journey that I think a lot of people would really like to take if they were open to it. To experience as much as you did and go on. You went to so many. It wasn't just here in New Jersey. You traveled.
I certainly did.
All over.
Yes.
For 2.5 years to really get the information for this book.
Exactly.
Are there any particular people or things that happened along the way that you say, I'll never forget that as long as I live, it changed me?
Well, Akka was big. I mean, Akka was big in my. But Akka also gave me instruction. He said, they want you to go to Jenny Lake, which is a few miles outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and they want you to go there at a certain time of the day because all the masters meet there. Okay. And the masters want you to be in their energy.
The masters, he described it?
He just said the masters. I said, who are the masters? He said, the spiritual masters.
Wow.
He said, it's going to help you with this book and any other book you write. And I am writing another book now, by the way.
But anybody else that you could think of along the way? I know for me, Frank St. James was
Frank
one that
St.
I'll
James
remember.
was great.
And Frank is, I'll let you briefly touch on Frank.
Yeah, Frank is a gentleman who finds bodies for police departments.
Right.
But we have to go back to when I was 18 years old. When I was 18 years old, I read a story in the Hudson Dispatch newspaper that talked about a lady in Edgewater who the police would go to if they had a missing person. Okay. I went to her door, I knocked on her door, she let me in, never knowing that 40 years later I would put her in the book and have a book on spirit. By the way, when she passed, her obituary was in the New York Times. Wow. She was that well known. I have my modern day Florence Sternfels and Frank St. James. Right. He's just fantastic. I said, Frank, when I interviewed him, I said, nobody's going to believe what you're telling me, because he said that the spirit of the missing person talks to him. And
you confirmed that by going to the actual police
I said, I need confirmation. He said, no, if I write this, nobody's going to believe it. He said, well, the chief of police in Englewood Cliffs could verify this. So he called up the chief of police, asked if I could visit. So I went from his office to the chief of police in Englewood Cliffs directly. Yeah. And not only did he give me a quote, chief of police signed a release form that I could put his quote in my book.
That's what I want to really get into, is you went from someone like that to another healer that you and I talked about the other day, that it was, he would gaze at you
Brasco,
and he could heal you, so you attended something like that. I want you to just kind of touch on the sort of different ones that sort of run the spectrum from medium to healer to just briefly.
Well, I mean, 5, 6, 7 of them I went to. I just think it shows that we have the power to heal inside of us. We have the power to be psychic. Right. We don't have to go to a professional.
You think everyone has that
Absolutely,
ability?
Without question. But what prevents us is our own limitation. Oh, I can't do that. People say, oh, I don't have that talent. Yes, you do. Everybody does.
Did you believe that before your journey?
I think I believed it when I witnessed my grandfather. When I was this adorable 10-year-old boy, I said to myself, wow, Papa Galeotto is doing this. I think we can all do this. I just had an intuition.
So you said, again, something really interesting, again, that struck me.
Thank you.
You said that the purpose of the book was you're a realist. You know there's plenty of non-believers out there and plenty of people that are afraid.
Sure.
But you said one of the purposes of the book was to just at least, like you said, open your mind to the possibility.
Hope and knowledge. Yes.
Right, to the possibility of this not being the end.
Yes.
And that there may be something beyond the physical life that we live. What advice would you give to someone who lost somebody?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, again, it's all part of the healing process and part of communication, and it would comfort, I'm sure, everyone to know. Because even my mom passed back in February. I always speak out loud to her, and I ask for silence.
Good. You're doing
but
what
I've
I would
never gotten the
advise.
communication from that side. How do you recommend
Because I think
that?
sometimes we expect to hear our loved one's
Right.
voice or see our loved one, but it could come in other ways. It could come in just we have a feeling to do this, but don't do that.
Right.
Some people I know smell
Right.
the perfume of their loved one. I interviewed somebody for my current book who finds coins, and he
Okay.
feels the coins on the ground are messages from his mom.
Right.
There are many signs and symbols. You just have to have an open mind and believe.
Is this something you're still doing frequently
Yes.
with
Yes.
your father?
Yes.
And
I mean,
friends? Do you communicate with friends as well? Other people that
I
you
have
know?
never gotten bad advice from my dad. My dad is my singular source of connection to spirit.
But do you try to openly communicate with friends, maybe? that
I'm
passed?
open to it. It
Right.
hasn't happened yet.
Huh.
And notice I say it yet. It hasn't
Yet.
happened yet.
Have you tried the same method as far as meditation?
Well,
or-
I sit there, I light a white candle.
White candle.
Usually I say a Hail Mary prayer.
Okay.
Because that's what I learned as a child. And I just listen. I breathe deeply a few times and I listen. It's easy. Anybody could do it, but many people don't have the patience for it.
Right.
Or they expect to see their mother in front of them. Well, you could sense her, you could feel her.
And I think that's a big part of it when it comes to, again, human nature, is that even with mediums, I know a lot of mediums, and I ask every single one of them, how does spirit come to you? Everything I knew up to 20 years ago was based on the movie Ghost. Whoopi saw the ghost there in front of her, and they talked, and she could see them physically, but mediums say they see pictures, they hear words from time to time, and I think for people, they want to believe. Most
Yes.
people do want to
I
believe.
agree with you, John.
But believing and proof is two different things.
Proof is a half a step away from belief.
Okay,
Once you believe, the universe opens up for you.
right. I do believe it. You said something else again that I agree. Consciousness. I'm a big believer in consciousness. I believe that what we call the soul actually is the consciousness, and that it does live on without the battery. But what happens to the consciousness afterwards? And you touch on that in your book, and that's part of the scientific part of it. And we talked about this in our conversation before being on the show here. The end of the book touches on the science of spirit communication. Could you talk a little bit about some of those studies that were done
Sure.
and the people that you interviewed?
How about Dr. Aben Alexander,
Okay.
who was a neurosurgeon, I believe, and he, according to him, he went to the other side
Right.
and came back.
Right.
How about Annie Kagan, who wrote, this is a book I recommend, The Afterlife of Billy Fingers.
Okay.
She's in touch with her brother who passed on, and he describes the other side. It's a great book.
Even the other studies with the mediums were they blindfolded, and they would do blind readings, and then they would see the people, but the people weren't allowed to ask the people questions that they were. I forget what they call the students.
Yeah, I
but-
saw something on TV about that.
Right. That was in your book, though, about the those type of experiments. I like that you went the gambit from what I would consider, my opinion would be way out there, to sort of like the ordinary people,
Sure.
to the medium aspect, to science.
To science, yes.
I think for most people, it is they need something tangible. They need
Yes,
something.
absolutely.
They need, like you said, it would be great to see and hear, but just
Sometimes you just feel.
that's
and
what it is mostly
know-
for you.
Yes, you know it's your mom or your father or your loved one, and you just have a sense, or they're kind of pushing you in a certain direction.
So, and you've used this method from
Countless times.
1993 to when was the last time that you?
What time is it now? A couple
was
hours
today?
ago. A couple
You
hours.
asked him about the interview?
Yeah, this morning. Not about
When
the
they say
interview.
bad idea, don't do the interview.
No, they said a great host.
Okay, well, he was right. Yeah, right, he is always right. But again, your journey, the book Spirit Lives, we could find that on
Amazon, where we've already received 91
another thing that drew me to your book.
5-star reviews.
Talk a little bit
How
about that.
about
We have a
this?
few minutes.
How
Talk a
about
little
this?
about how touched you were.
When I read because I don't just look at the number, I
Right.
read the reviews, how it's helped people get through the loss of a close loved one. 2 years ago, I live in Hoboken, and Hoboken is known for many things. One of the things it's known for is the street festival the Church of St. Anne's has. I mean, it's like San Gennaro in New York. And 2 years ago, I was walking in the feast right in front of the church, and the church has about a 12, 15 step, pretty steep stairway to the front of the church. And a woman grabbed my arm as I passed by. And she said, "Are you the man who wrote the book?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Your book helped me get through the loss of my husband."
See, and
That's payment.
And you
That's
mentioned
payment.
there's review after, and I did. One part of my process was reading those reviews, and that made me want to reach out to you even more because, again, these are real people. And I think your book is therapeutic.
Thank you.
I think it gives people hope in what is their most difficult times
Oh,
in
absolutely.
their life. I recommend it highly.
Thank you.
As someone I'm getting older now, I've suffered a loss. But I do think, for me, I've always had an interest in the field, but your book definitely opened my mind
Thank you.
more to the possibility
Thank you.
of what if. And I will try your process, and I recommend people read this book. If you lost someone or if you're open to the possibility of spirit realm, afterlife, and John Muciaccia, am I
Yes,
right?
you are right.
Look up Spirit Lives on Amazon.
Amazon,
You're
yes.
working on your next book, which I
Which
imagine.
is aimed at skeptics, by the way.
Okay, well, I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, John.
You definitely, like I said, made me think of things a lot different. And I would give your book just as good as review as the others.
Thank you. And Dad was right this morning about today's interview.
All right, well, thank you for being here. Thank you all for watching this episode of New Jersey Paranormal, and we'll see you next time.